When Elena flees a humiliating breakup, she stumbles into the men's room, crying, broken, and into the arms of a stranger who doesn't walk away. But who is Silas Thorne, really? And why does he feel like fate? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. Elena Miles stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, leaving black streaks that matched how she felt inside, broken and messy. Just 30 minutes ago, her boyfriend of 4 years had looked her in the eye and told her he wasn't inspired by her anymore. 4 years, she whispered, her voice cracking. 4 years and he dumps me in a restaurant full of people. She'd managed to keep herself together long enough to walk out with her head held high, but once she was in the hallway of the upscale hotel, the tears had started to fall. She desperately looked for somewhere private to fall apart. In her hurry, she hadn't noticed the sign on the door. She just saw restroom and pushed it open. Now here she was, crying in what she suddenly realized was the men's bathroom. The expensive marble tiles and soft lighting didn't make her feel any better. "I can't even find the right bathroom," she said, laughing bitterly through her tears. She turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, not caring that it made her makeup situation worse. What did it matter? The man she thought she'd marry had just told her she was safe but not satisfying, as if love was supposed to be a fireworks show rather than a promise kept. The bathroom door opened. Elena froze, water dripping from her chin. A man stood in the doorway, tall with dark hair and eyes that widened when he saw her. He wore an expensive-looking suit that fit him perfectly, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. "I'm so sorry," Elena blurted out, mortified. "I didn't realize. I'll go." "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Elena looked down at herself, her black dress now spotted with water, her makeup a disaster, her eyes red and puffy. "No," she admitted with a helpless shrug. "But that's not your problem. I'm in the wrong bathroom." She moved to leave, but her legs suddenly felt weak. Before she knew what was happening, she slid down against the tile wall, landing on the floor with a soft thud. The tears came again, harder this time, as if a dam had broken inside her. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry." The man didn't leave. Instead, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and dampened it with cool water. Then, to Elena's surprise, he sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite wall. He offered her the handkerchief. "Here," he said softly. Elena took it, pressing it against her hot face. "Thank you. I'm making a complete fool of myself." "You're not," he said. Elena wiped her eyes and looked at him more carefully. He was handsome in an understated way, with thoughtful eyes and a serious mouth. He didn't look annoyed or uncomfortable. He looked concerned. "If I were the man who let you cry like that," he said quietly, "I'd never forgive myself." Something about his words made Elena cry harder, but differently now. Not from pain, but from relief. Like someone finally understood. "He said I wasn't exciting enough," she found herself saying to this stranger, after 4 years in the middle of dinner, with people at the next table listening. The man's expression darkened. "That's cruel. He said he needs someone who inspires him? That I'm too predictable." Elena let out a shaky laugh. "I guess crying in the men's room is one way to be unpredictable." The corner of the man's mouth lifted slightly. "It certainly made my evening more interesting." Elena laughed through her tears, surprising herself. "I'm Silas," he said simply. "Elena." "Do you want to talk about it, Elena?" he asked. "Or would you rather I leave you alone?" No one had asked her what she wanted in a long time. Her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend now, had always decided everything, from where they ate to what they did on weekends. "I don't want to be alone right now," she admitted. Silas nodded. "Then I'll stay." And he did. For 43 minutes they sat on the bathroom floor while Elena talked. About how she'd given 4 years to a man who could throw her away so easily. About how embarrassed she felt. About how she'd moved to the city for him, changed her career path for him, become someone different for him. Silas mostly listened, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful. People who need to be constantly inspired, he said, are often running from themselves. Eleanor had never thought of it that way. What do you mean? Some people need constant novelty because they're afraid to look inward. It's easier to blame others for not being exciting enough than to face your own emptiness. His words hit her like a splash of cold water. You're saying he's empty inside? Silas shrugged. I don't know him, but anyone who would hurt you like that isn't as full as he thinks he is. Elena studied Silas. There was something different about him. He wasn't trying to impress her or fix her problem. He was just present. Why are you being so nice to me? She asked. He seemed surprised by the question. Why wouldn't I be? Such a simple answer, but it made Elena's heart ache. When had kindness become so unexpected? Finally, Elena stood up, her legs steadier now. I should go, I've kept you long enough. Silas rose too, graceful despite his tall frame. You haven't kept me, I stayed because I wanted to. Well, thank you. For the handkerchief. And for listening. Eleanor glanced at herself in the mirror and winced. And for not running away from the crazy crying lady in the wrong bathroom? Anyone would have done the same, Silas said. But Elena knew that wasn't true. Most people would have walked away. Most people wouldn't have sat on a bathroom floor in an expensive suit to listen to a stranger cry. Goodbye, Silas, she said, suddenly shy. And thank you again. Goodbye, Elena. She walked out, not looking back, though she felt his eyes on her until the door closed between them. The next morning, Eleanor woke up with swollen eyes and a strange emptiness in her chest. She reached for her phone, half expecting to see a message from her ex, but there was nothing. Just a reminder that she had to work at the bookstore that afternoon. The bookstore job was something she'd kept even after moving in with her ex. It didn't pay much, but she loved being surrounded by books, loved the quiet conversations with customers who shared her passion for reading. Her ex had always called it her hobby job, making it clear he thought it was beneath her. She got up, fed her dog Jasper, and tried to go through the motions of a normal day. But nothing felt normal anymore. What do we do now, Jasper? She asked the golden retriever, who leaned his head against her leg sympathetically. Her phone rang. It was her sister, Claire. I just heard what happened, Claire said, without preamble. Why didn't you call me? I don't know, Elena sighed. I guess I didn't want to make it real by talking about it. He's a jerk, Claire declared. Always has been. I never understood what you saw in him. He wasn't always like this, Elena defended, then wondered why she was defending him. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? No, I'm fine. I have to work this afternoon anyway. Work will be good for you, Claire said. Keep you busy. After talking to her sister, Eleanor took Jasper for a walk, trying to clear her head. The city streets were busy with Saturday shoppers, but she barely noticed them. Her mind kept going. Back to the night before. Not to the breakup, but to the strange conversation in the men's bathroom. Silas. She wondered who he was, what he did, why he had been at that hotel. She'd been so caught up in her own drama that she hadn't asked him a single question about himself. By the time she got to the bookstore, her mood had lifted a little. The familiar smell of books and coffee welcomed her as she walked in. There, she is, said Martha, the owner. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. I was starting to worry. Sorry I'm late, Elena said, hanging up her coat. You look tired, dear. Everything all right? Elena hesitated, then decided Martha deserved the truth. Not really. James and I broke up last night. Martha's face softened. Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Don't be, Elena said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. It's for the best. She spent the afternoon helping customers, arranging displays and losing herself in the familiar routine. The bookstore was busier than usual for a Saturday, which she was grateful for. It kept her mind off her problems. Around 4 o'clock, when the crowd had thinned a bit, the bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up from the register and felt her heart skip a beat. Silas walked in, looking as put together as he had the night before, though today he wore dark jeans and a simple grey sweater instead of a suit. He didn't see her at first, his eyes scanning the shelves with interest. Elena wasn't sure what to do. Should she say hello? Pretend she didn't recognize him? Hide in the back room? Before she could decide, he turned and saw her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something that looked like pleasure. He walked over to the counter. "Hello, Elena?" "Silas," she said, surprised he'd remembered her name. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around the bookstore. "Looking for a book." "Well, you're in the right place," she said, smiling despite herself. "I was hoping you could help me find something specific." "That's what I'm here for." "What are you looking for?" "The secret garden," he said. Elena blinked in surprise. "Really? Is that strange?" "No, it's just—" She hesitated. "It's one of my favorites. I mentioned it last night." Silas nodded. "You did. You said it was the book that made you fall in love with reading." The fact that he remembered such a small detail from their conversation made something warm bloom in Elena's chest. "Follow me," she said, leading him to the classics section. She pulled a beautiful hardcover edition from the shelf. "This one has the original illustrations." Silas took the book, his fingers brushing against hers for a moment. "Perfect, I'll take it." As Eleanor rang up his purchase, she couldn't help asking, "Have you read it before?" "No," he admitted, "but I've heard it's about finding beauty in unexpected places." Their eyes met, and Elena felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "That's a good way to describe it," she said softly. Silas paid for the book, then lingered at the counter. "Thank you for the recommendation." "Thank you for buying it," she replied, suddenly feeling shy again. He turned to leave, then paused. "Maybe next Saturday you can recommend another book." It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It hung in the air between them, full of possibility. "I'll be here," Elena said. Silas smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "So will I." After he left, Martha came over, curiosity written all over her face. "Who was that?" Elena watched through the window as Silas walked down the street. "Just someone who helped me when I needed it." "Well," Martha said with a knowing look, "he certainly seemed happy to see you." Elena thought about the book he'd bought, about the fact that he'd remembered what she'd said during one of the worst moments of her life. I was happy to see him too, she realized, and for the first time since the breakup, she felt a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from something bad. That night, as she curled up on her couch with Jasper at her feet, Eleanor found herself thinking about Silas again. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quietness, a depth that she wasn't used to. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was from James. "I left some things at your place. Can I come by tomorrow to get them?" No apology. No, how are you? Just a practical request, as if their 4 years together meant nothing. Elena stared at the message, feeling the hurt rise up again. But something else rose with it this time. Anger. "The boxes are outside my door," she typed back. "Don't ring the bell." She put her phone down and looked at Jasper. "We're going to be okay, boy. We're going to be just fine." As she said it, she almost believed it. And as she drifted off to sleep, it wasn't James she thought about, but a pair of thoughtful eyes and a voice that had said, "If I were the man who let you cry like that, I'd never forgive myself." True to his word, Silas returned to the bookstore the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the one after that. Each visit followed the same pattern. He would arrive around 4 o'clock, browse for a while, and then ask Elena for a recommendation. She would lead him to a book she loved, tell him why it was special to her, and he would buy it without hesitation. They would talk for a few minutes, never long, just enough to feel like old friends rather than strangers. And then he would leave with a promise to return the next week. On his 5th visit, as summer turned to early fall, Elena finally gathered the courage to ask him about the books. "Have you actually read all of them?" She asked as she rang up his latest purchase, a collection of poetry she'd loved since college. Silas nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Every word." "And? What did you think?" "I think—" He paused, looking at her directly. I understand you a little better with each one." The simple honesty of his answer made Elena's heart beat faster. "That's why you're buying them, isn't it? To understand me?" "Is that strange?" he asked, echoing the question he'd asked on his first visit. Elena smiled. "No, it's nice. Different, but nice." "Different from what?" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. Different from what I'm used to. James, my ex, he never read anything I recommended. He said fiction was a waste of time. Silas frowned. That's like saying dreams are a waste of sleep. The comparison made Elena laugh. I've never thought of it that way. Would you... Silas seemed uncharacteristically nervous. Would you like to get coffee sometime? To talk about the books properly, I mean. It wasn't exactly a date, but it was more than their brief bookstore conversations. Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. Was she ready to spend time with another man? But pushed it aside. I'd like that, she said. They agreed to meet the following day at a small cafe down the street from the bookstore. As Silas left, Martha approached Elena with a knowing smile. That young man is smitten with you, she said. Elena shook her head. We're just friends. I don't even know anything about him. Then why are you smiling like that? Eleanor touched her cheeks, surprised to find they were warm. I don't know. He's just different. Different is good, Martha said. Different might be exactly what you need. The cafe was quiet on Sunday afternoon, with just a few customers scattered at tables. Elena arrived early, nervous, without really understanding why. She chose a table by the window, where autumn sunlight streamed in. Silas arrived exactly on time, looking more casual than she'd ever seen him, in a simple button-down shirt and jeans. He carried a worn leather messenger bag over his shoulder. Have you been waiting long? He asked as he sat across from her. Just a few minutes, she assured him. After they ordered black coffee for him, a latte for her, an awkward silence fell between them. Outside the bookstore, without the familiar rhythm of customer and employee, they seemed unsure how to begin. So, Elena said finally, what do you do? For work, I mean. I develop software, Silas replied. Specifically, programs that help other programs run more efficiently. That sounds complicated. It can be, but it's logical. I like logic. He took a sip of his coffee. What about you? Is the bookstore your main job? Elena nodded. For now, I used to work in marketing, but I quit. When? She trailed off. When? Silas prompted gently. When James told me my career was getting in the way of his. The words sounded even worse spoken aloud than they had in her head. I know how that sounds. It sounds like he asked you to make yourself smaller to make room for him, Silas said, his voice quiet but firm. Elena looked down at her coffee, surprised by the accuracy of his assessment. I didn't see it that way at the time. And now? Now I wonder why I let it happen, she admitted. Why I didn't fight harder for what I wanted. What did you want? Silas asked. It was such a simple question, but it hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. What had she wanted? Before James, before changing her life to fit his. I wanted to write, she said finally. Marketing was just a way to pay the bills, but what I really loved was writing stories. She laughed self-consciously. Silly, right? Not at all, Silas said with surprising intensity. Why would that be silly? James thought so. He said I needed to be practical, that writing was a hobby, not a career. Silas frowned. The more I hear about this man, the less I understand why you were with him. The bluntness of his statement made Elena blink in surprise. I'm sorry. He said quickly. That was rude. No, it's okay. Elena found herself smiling. I've been wondering the same thing lately. Their conversation flowed more easily after that. They talked about books, of course, the ones he'd bought, the ones she loved but hadn't recommended yet, the ones that had shaped them both. But they also talked about other things, his love of classical music, her dream of traveling to England to see the settings of her favorite novels, his fondness for early morning walks, her golden retriever, Jasper. He sounds like a good dog, Silas said when she described how Jasper had stayed by her side during the worst days after the breakup. The best, Eleanor agreed. He's better than most people. I'd like to meet him sometime, Silas said, then immediately looked as if he regretted the words. If that's not too forward. The idea of Silas in her home meeting her dog felt significant in a way Elena wasn't quite ready to examine, but she found herself nodding. Maybe someday, she said. When they finally left the cafe, 3 hours had passed without either of them noticing. They stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, neither wanting to be the first to say goodbye. Thank you for this, Silas said. I enjoyed talking with you. Me too, Elena replied. It was nice to talk about books with someone who actually reads them. Silas smiled, and Elena noticed again how it transformed his face, softening the serious lines around his mouth and eyes. Same time next week? He asked. Elena nodded, feeling a warm glow of anticipation. I'll be at the bookstore on Saturday. I'll be there, he promised. As she walked home, Eleanor realized she'd spent an entire afternoon without once thinking about James or the breakup. Instead, her mind had been filled with conversations about books and dreams and the quiet intensity in Silas's eyes when he listened to her speak. It felt like waking up after a long sleep. The cafe meetings became a regular part of their routine. Every Saturday, Silas would come to the bookstore for a new recommendation, and every Sunday, they would meet to discuss it over coffee. As the weeks passed, Eleanor found herself looking forward to seeing Silas more than she wanted to admit. There was something so refreshing about his presence, his thoughtfulness, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, the way he never made her feel small or silly. One Sunday in late October, as they sat in their usual spot by the window, Eleanor realized Silas had shared very little about his personal life, despite their many conversations. You know so much about me, she said, but I feel like I hardly know anything about you. Silas looked uncomfortable. What do you want to know? Anything. Where you grew up, your family, past relationships. She hadn't meant to ask about the last one, but it slipped out. I grew up in Connecticut, he said, focusing on his coffee cup. Only child. My parents were both professors, literature for my mother, physics for my father. That explains your love of both books and logic, Eleanor said with a smile. Silas nodded. They had high expectations. Excellence was the baseline, not something to celebrate. There was an undercurrent of sadness in his words that made Elena want to reach for his hand, but she resisted. And relationships? She asked gently. A flash of something, discomfort, fear, crossed his face. Not much to tell. Eleanor sensed there was more to the story, but didn't push. I'm sorry. That's personal. You don't have to talk about it. No. It's okay. Silas took a deep breath. The truth is, I haven't had many relationships. I've been focused on work, on building my company. Your company? Elena repeated. I thought you said you developed software. I do, he said. For my company, Thorn Technologies. Elena's eyes widened. Wait, Thorn Technologies? The Thorn Technologies? The one that makes those security programs everyone uses? Silas nodded, looking embarrassed. Yes. You own that? Company. I founded it, yes. Elena sat back in her chair, stunned. She'd had no idea she'd been spending time with someone so successful. Thorn Technologies was a major player in the tech industry. She'd read articles about it in business magazines. When she worked in marketing. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. Silas shrugged. It never came up, and he hesitated. I liked that you didn't know, that you were talking to me, not to my company or my bank account. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor suddenly understood why he might be cautious about relationships. Has that been a problem for you? She asked. People being interested in your success rather than you? Sometimes, he admitted. It's hard to know people's true motivations. Eleanor thought about their first meeting, her crying on the bathroom floor, him offering comfort with no expectation of return. How many people saw that side of him? The kind, thoughtful man beneath the successful businessman. Is that why you haven't had many relationships? She asked softly. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Partly, he finally said, but also because I've never met someone who... He trailed off, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. Someone who what? Elena prompted. Someone who felt right, he said simply. The words sent a shiver down Elena's spine, not because they were particularly romantic, but because of the raw honesty behind them. Silas wasn't playing games or trying to impress her. He was just telling the truth. I understand that, she said. I thought James felt right, but I was wrong. I think sometimes we convince ourselves someone is right because we want them to be. Silas nodded. Or because we're afraid of being alone. Are you afraid of being alone? Elena asked. No, he said without hesitation. I've always been comfortable with solitude, but lately... Lately? His eyes met hers again, steady and clear. Lately I've been thinking there might be something better than being comfortable. The words hung between them, full of possibility. Elena felt her heart beating faster. Like what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Like being understood, Silas said. Like talking for hours and still having more to say. Like looking forward to seeing someone all week. Elena felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Is that how you feel? When you see me? Silas didn't look away. Yes. The simple admission made Elena's breath catch. No one had ever been so straightforward with her, so unguarded about their feelings. I look forward to seeing you too, she admitted. Silas smiled, that rare, transformative smile that changed his whole face. Good. They finished their coffee in a comfortable silence, both aware that something had shifted between them. As they stood to leave, Silas hesitated. Would you like to have dinner with me? He asked. Friday night. It was clearly a date. Their coffee meetings could be interpreted as friendly chats, but dinner was different. Elena felt a flutter of nerves, but underneath them was excitement. I'd like that, she said. I'll pick you up at 7. Elena nodded, giving him her address. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Silas reached out and briefly touched her arm, the first time he had initiated physical contact. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent warmth spreading through Elena's body. Until Friday, he said. Until Friday, she echoed. As she walked home, Elena realized she was smiling. For the first time since her breakup, maybe for the first time in years, she was genuinely looking forward to a date. Not because she needed someone to validate her, or because she was afraid of being alone, but because she wanted to spend more time with this specific person. This quiet, thoughtful man who had sat with her while she cried, who read books because she loved them, who looked at her like she was worth understanding. Silas Thorne, who had never met someone who felt right, until perhaps now. When she got home, Jasper greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. Helena knelt to pet him, burying her face in his soft fur. I think I like him, Jasper, she whispered. I really think I do. And for once, the thought didn't scare her at all. Friday arrived, and Elena found herself more nervous than she'd been, for a date in years. She changed her outfit 3 times, before settling on a simple blue dress that Claire had once told her brought out her eyes. She wore her hair down, the way she liked it, not pulled back the way James had preferred. At exactly 7 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Elena took a deep breath, gave Jasper a quick pat and opened the door. Silas stood there in a charcoal grey suit that fit him perfectly. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, not roses or lilies, but colourful, unpretentious blooms that reminded Elena of the illustrations in The Secret Garden. These are for you, he said, offering the flowers with a slight awkwardness that Elena found endearing. They're beautiful, she said, genuinely touched. How did you know I prefer wildflowers to roses? You mentioned it once, Silas replied, when you were talking about your favorite scene in Pride and Prejudice. Elena was amazed that he remembered such a small detail from their conversations. James had never remembered anything she liked, always buying her roses, even though she'd told him repeatedly she preferred simpler flowers. As she put the flowers in water, Jasper approached Silas cautiously, sniffing at his shoes. This must be Jasper, Silas said, kneeling down to the dog's level. He held out his hand, palm up, letting Jasper decide whether to accept him. After a moment's consideration, Jasper licked Silas's hand and wagged his tail. He likes you, Elena said, surprised. Jasper had never warmed up to James, something she'd ignored at the time but now seemed significant. I like him too, Silas said, gently scratching behind Jasper's ears. He looked up at Elena with a smile. Ready to go? Elena nodded, grabbing her purse and giving Jasper one last pat. Be good, boy. I'll be back later. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. Not flashy or ostentatious, but clearly expensive. Your car? Elena asked. Yes, Silas said, opening the passenger door for her. I hope you don't mind. It's nice, she said as she slid into the leather seat, though I was half expecting you to have a driver, now that I know you're a tech mogul. Silas laughed as he got in the driver's side. Hardly a mogul, and I prefer to drive myself. I like being in control. The comment seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made Elena glance at him curiously. There was a tension in his shoulders, a careful precision to his movements as he pulled away from the curb. "Are you nervous?" she asked directly. Silas's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," Elena admitted. "But it's okay, I'm nervous too." He shot her a grateful look. "I don't do this often." "Drive?" "Date," he clarified. The simple admission hung in the air between them. Elena had suspected as much from their previous conversations, but hearing him say it made her heart soften toward him even more. "Well, I haven't dated in 4 years," she offered, "so we're both out of practice." His smile was quick but genuine. "That makes me feel better." They drove to a small, elegant restaurant by the river. It wasn't one of the trendy spots that James had always insisted on, the places where people went to be seen rather than to enjoy their meal. This place was intimate, with warm lighting and tables spaced far enough apart for private conversation. "How did you find this place?" Eleanor asked as they were seated at a corner table with a view of the water. "I asked Martha for a recommendation," Silas admitted. "I wanted somewhere you'd like." The fact that he'd gone to her boss for advice, that he'd put that much thought into where to take her, touched Elena deeply. "You asked Martha about me?" she said, smiling. "I did," he confessed. "She was very helpful, though she made me promise my intentions were honorable." Eleanor laughed. "That sounds like Martha. She's protective." "As she should be," Silas said seriously. "You deserve people who look out for you." The simple statement, delivered without expectation or flattery, made Elena's chest tighten with emotion. She'd spent so many years with someone who made her feel lucky to be chosen. Silas made her feel worthy of care. Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed easily, much like during their coffee meetings. But there was a new undercurrent now, a shared acknowledgement that this was more than friendship. As they finished their main course, Elena found herself studying Silas's face. The thoughtful eyes, the serious mouth that transformed when he smiled, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was always thinking, always analyzing. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Nothing," she said. "I just like looking at you." A flush crept up his neck and he looked down at his plate. "I'm not used to that." "To what?" "Being looked at," he said quietly. "Being seen." The vulnerability in his voice made Elena want to reach across the table and take his hand, but something held her back. A sense that Silas needed space, that rushing him would be a mistake. "I find that hard to believe," she said instead. "You're successful, handsome, intelligent. People must look at you all the time." "They look at what I represent," he corrected. "Success, money, power, not at me." Elena understood then something fundamental about Silas. His reserve wasn't arrogance or coldness. It was protection, a shield against people who wanted what he had rather than who he was. "I see you," she said simply. "The man who sat on a bathroom floor to comfort a crying stranger. The man who reads books because I love them. That's who I'm looking at." Silas met her eyes then, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. "Thank you," he said softly. After dinner, they walked along the riverfront promenade. The October night was cool but not cold, the sky clear and filled with stars. "It's beautiful here," Elena said, looking up at the night sky. "Yes," Silas agreed. But when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the stars. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water. Elena sat down, and after a moment's hesitation, Silas joined her, leaving a careful space between them. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, turning to face him. "Something personal?" Silas nodded, though she noticed his body tense slightly. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you come to the bookstore that first day? Why did you keep coming back?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the water. Then he turned to her. "Because I couldn't forget you," he said simply. "Not your tears, not your honesty. Not the way you talked about heartbreak like it was a wound you weren't ashamed of having." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I've spent my life being careful," he continued, "keeping people at a distance, building walls. But that night in the bathroom, when you looked at me through your tears and thanked me for staying with you," he shook his head slightly, "something changed." "What?" Elena asked softly. "I wanted to be someone who deserved that gratitude," he said. "Someone who could be there for another person, not just observe from a safe distance." The honesty of his answer moved Elena deeply. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cool against hers, and she felt a slight tremor run through them at her touch. "Your hands are cold," she said, covering his hand with both of hers. "I'm not used to being touched," he admitted, his voice low. The statement struck Elena as strange. "Not at all." Silas hesitated, then shook his head. "Not often. Not like this." There was something in his tone, something left unsaid, that made Elena curious. But she didn't push. Instead, she kept holding his hand, feeling the gradual warming of his skin beneath her fingers. "Is this okay?" she asked. "More than okay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in silence for a while, hand in hand, watching the moonlight. On the water. It was such a simple thing, holding hands, but Elena felt it like a profound connection, as if some invisible current flowed between them. When they finally rose to leave, Silas kept her hand in his as they walked back to the car. His grip was gentle but sure now, the earlier trembling gone. The drive back to Elena's apartment was quiet, a comfortable silence filled with unspoken thoughts. When they arrived, Silas walked her to her door. "Thank you for tonight," Elena said, turning to face him outside her apartment. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Silas replied, his eyes searching her face in the soft light of the hallway. Elena felt the familiar tension of a first date goodbye, the question of whether there would be a kiss. Part of her wanted it, wanted to know if Silas's lips would be as gentle as his words, as careful as his touch. But Silas made no move to kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost courtly, but there was nothing stiff or formal about it. It felt intimate, somehow more meaningful than a rushed kiss would have been. "Good night, Silas," she replied, her voice not quite steady. Inside her apartment, Elena leaned against the closed door, her heart beating fast. Jasper came to greet her, tail wagging, and she knelt to hug him. "He's different, Jasper," she whispered. "So different." As she got ready for bed, Elena's phone chimed with a text. It was from Silas. "Thank you for making me feel seen." 5 simple words, but they brought tears to her eyes. Not sad tears like the ones she'd cried in that hotel bathroom, but tears of something that felt like hope. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Silas settled into a new rhythm. They still met at the bookstore on Saturdays and for coffee on Sundays, but now they also had dinner together on Friday nights. Sometimes they went to restaurants, sometimes Elena cooked at her apartment, sometimes they ordered takeout and watched old movies on her couch, Jasper curled at their feet. With each meeting, each conversation, each shared laugh, Elena felt herself falling deeper. Not the desperate, clinging love she'd had with James, but something steadier, something that felt like standing on solid ground after years of shifting sand. But there was still something holding Silas back. He held her hand, kissed her cheek. I even put his arm around her during movies, but he never tried to kiss her properly, never suggested they take things further. Each time they said goodnight, Eleanor felt the moment when it could happen, the pause, the look, the tension, but Silas always pulled back, always left her at her door with a squeeze of her hand or a kiss on her forehead. At first, Eleanor appreciated his restraint. It was refreshing after James, who had always pushed for more, always made her feel like her body was something he was entitled to. But as the weeks passed, she began to wonder if there was something more to Silas's hesitation. 1. Friday night in November, after they'd had dinner at her apartment and were sitting on the couch with cups of tea, Elena decided to ask. "Silas," she began, setting down her cup, "can I ask you something?" He looked at her attentively. Of course. Why haven't you kissed me? The question hung in the air between them. Silas's face went still, his eyes wary. Do you want me to? He asked finally. Yes, Elena said simply, but only if you want to. I feel like maybe you're holding back, and I wonder why. Silas set down his own cup, his movements precise. It's not that I don't want to, he said carefully. It's that He paused, struggling for words. I don't want to disappoint you. Disappoint me? Elena repeated, confused. How would you disappoint me? Silas looked down at his hands. I told you, I haven't had many relationships. Yes, the truth is, he took a deep breath. I haven't had any, not real ones. Elena's eyes widened slightly. None? I've been on dates, he clarified, but nothing ever progressed. I always found a reason to end things before they got serious. Why? Elena asked gently. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I've always been different. Growing up, while other kids were figuring out who they liked, who they wanted to kiss, I was building computers in my room. In college, when everyone was dating, hooking up, I was starting my company, working 18-hour days. He glanced at her, then away again. It wasn't that I didn't want connection. I just never found someone who made me feel like it was worth the risk. What risk? Elena asked. The risk of being vulnerable, he said, of letting someone see all of me, of not being enough. The raw honesty in his voice made Elena's heart ache. She moved closer to him on the couch, close enough that their knees touched. Silas, she said softly, look at me. He raised his eyes to hers, and the vulnerability she saw there took her breath away. You are enough, she said firmly. More than enough. Silas swallowed hard. There's something else, he said. Something I should tell you. Elena waited, giving him space to find the words. I've never... He stopped, then tried again. I haven't... He shook his head, frustrated with himself. It's okay, Elena said, taking his hand. Whatever it is, it's okay. Silas looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. I've never been with anyone, he said finally. Physically, I mean. It took Elena a moment to understand what he was saying. You're a virgin, she said, not a question but a realization. Silas nodded, his eyes never leaving hers, waiting for her reaction. Elena felt many things in that moment. Surprise, yes, but also a deep tenderness, a sense of being trusted with something precious. That's why you haven't kissed me, she said softly. You're afraid. Not afraid, he corrected. Just, I want it to be right. When I finally share that part of myself with someone, I want it to be with someone who understands what it means to me, someone who won't take it lightly. His words washed over Elena like a warm wave. In a world where physical intimacy was often treated as casual, meaningless, here was a man who saw it as something sacred, something to be saved for the right person, the right moment. Thank you for telling me, she said, squeezing his hand, for trusting me with this. Silas's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension leaving his body. You're not put off? Most women would be. I'm not most women, Elena said with a small smile. And you're not most men, that's why we fit. The relief in Silas's eyes was palpable. So where does this leave us, he asked. Elena thought for a moment. It leaves us right where we are, she said. Getting to know each other. Building something. Real, no pressure, no rush. But you still want me to kiss you, he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Only when you're ready, Elena replied. Only when it feels right. Silas looked at her for a long moment, his eyes moving over her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers light against her skin. What if it feels right now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's heart beat faster. Then I'm right here, she said softly. Silas leaned forward, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Elena closed her eyes as his lips met hers, gentle and questioning. She kept the kiss soft, letting him lead, letting him discover the rhythm of it. When they pulled apart, Silas's eyes were wide with wonder, as if he'd just discovered something miraculous. "Was that okay?" he asked. Elena smiled, her heart full to bursting. "That was perfect," she said. And as Silas smiled back at her, his face transformed by joy, Elena knew with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with him. Not because he was handsome or successful or kind, though he was all those things, but because he had waited. Because he had saved this part of himself, kept it safe and whole, until he found someone he trusted enough to share it with. Because she was that someone, and in that moment, that was enough. As winter settled over the city, Eleanor and Silas grew closer. Their first kiss had broken a barrier between them, allowing a new kind of intimacy to develop. Not just physical, though they did share more kisses, each one less hesitant than the last, but emotional as well. Silas began to open up, more about his life, his work, his dreams. Eleanor learned that despite his success, he often felt like an outsider in the tech world, too focused on creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. She learned that he donated a significant portion of his wealth to education programs for underprivileged children. She learned that he still called his parents every Sunday night, even though their conversations were often strained by expectations he could never quite meet. In turn, Eleanor shared more of herself with him. She showed him the stories she'd written, years ago, before James had dismissed her passion as childish. She told him about her dreams of someday opening her own bookstore, one that would host writing workshops for young people. She confessed her fears of losing herself in someone else again, of becoming so focused on being what they wanted that she forgot who she was. "I won't let that happen," Silas promised one snowy evening as they sat on her couch, his arm around her shoulders. "I fell for who you are, not who you might become." Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I know," she said. "That's why this feels so different." And it did feel different. Where her relationship with James had been all flash and intensity, burning hot but ultimately hollow, what she had with Silas was steady and deep, a warmth that grew stronger with time rather than fading. One Friday evening in December, Eleanor was surprised to find Claire waiting outside the bookstore at closing time. "Claire, what are you doing here?" she asked as she locked the door behind her. "I came to meet this mystery man of yours," Claire said, her breath visible in the cold air. "You've been seeing him for months now, and I still haven't met him." Elena felt a flicker of annoyance. "We're having dinner at my place tonight. You could have called first." "Would you have invited me?" Claire asked, raising an eyebrow. "Probably not," Eleanor admitted. She loved her sister, but Claire could be overwhelming at first meeting, direct to the point of bluntness with no filter between her thoughts and her words. "Exactly," Claire said. "So, here I am. Don't worry. I won't stay long. Just long enough to make sure he's good enough for my little sister." Elena sighed. "Fine, but please be nice. Silas is different." "Different how?" Claire asked as they began walking toward Elena's apartment. "He's more thoughtful than other men I've known, more genuine." Elena searched for the right words. "He doesn't play games or put on an act. What you see is what you get." Claire looked skeptical. "Sounds too good to be true, especially for a rich tech guy." "He's not like that," Elena insisted. "His money isn't who he is." "If you say so," Claire said, but her tone made it clear she wasn't convinced. By the time they reached Elena's apartment, Silas was already there, having let himself in with the key Elena had given him the week before. He was in the kitchen, Jasper at his feet, stirring something that smelled delicious on the stove. "Something smells amazing," Eleanor said, hanging up her coat. Silas turned with a smile that faltered slightly when he saw Claire. "Silas, this is my sister Claire," Eleanor said quickly. "She stopped by to say hello." "Uninvited," Claire added with a grin. "But I had to meet the man who's made my sister happier than I've seen her in years." Silas wiped his hands on a towel and extended one to Claire. "It's nice to meet you," he said politely. Though Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, Silas was always reserved with new people, and Claire's direct approach was likely to make him even more so. "So," Claire said, settling herself on a bar stool at the kitchen counter, "You're the famous Silas Thorne. Elena's told me a lot about you." "Has she?" Silas glanced at Elena, a question in his eyes. "All good things," Elena assured him. "Claire, what Silas is too polite to say is that we weren't expecting company for dinner." "Oh, I'm not staying for dinner," Claire said, waving a hand. "I just wanted to meet the man who's replaced James in my sister's life." Silas's expression tightened at the mention of James, but he said nothing, returning to the stove. "I haven't replaced anyone," he said quietly. "Elena and I are building something new, not replacing something old." The simple statement, delivered without defensiveness, seemed to catch Claire off guard. She looked at Silas more carefully. "That's a good way to put it," she conceded. The next 15 minutes were awkward but not disastrous. Claire asked Silas about his work, his family, his intentions toward Eleanor. Questions that made Eleanor cringe, but that Silas answered with straightforward honesty. When Claire finally stood to leave, she surprised Eleanor by giving Silas a quick hug. "You're not what I expected," she said, "but I think you might be exactly what my sister needs." After she left, Elena turned to Silas with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that. Claire can be a bit much." "She loves you," Silas said simply. "I can't fault her for that." Elena wrapped her arms around him from behind as he returned to cooking. "How did I get so lucky to find someone so understanding?" Silas turned in her embrace, his hands settling at her waist. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "And I plan to spend however long you'll have me proving that." The certainty in his voice, the steady look in his eyes made Elena's heart swell. This, she realized, was what love was supposed to feel like. Not a desperate clinging or a constant need for reassurance, but a quiet certainty. A knowledge that you were exactly where you were meant to be. "I love you," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. Silas went very still, his eyes widening slightly. "You don't have to say it back," Elena added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Elena," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been in love with you since that night in the bathroom. I just didn't know how to say it." "Well, you just did," she said, smiling through sudden tears. He kissed her then, more deeply than before, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious, something irreplaceable. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he repeated, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. "I love you." They ate dinner that night, sitting close together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing, exchanging kisses between bites. When it got late, Silas didn't leave as he usually did. Instead, he stayed, holding Elena as they fell asleep, fully clothed on top of her bed. It was the first night they spent together, though not in the way the world might have expected. But for them, it was perfect. A new level of trust, of closeness that didn't need to be rushed. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Elena's life. She and Silas settled into a comfortable routine, spending most evenings and weekends together. He kept his own apartment, but stayed over at hers more often than not, always respectful of her space and her boundaries. They still hadn't taken the final step in physical intimacy, but Elena was in no hurry. There was something beautiful about the way they were getting to know each other's bodies slowly, learning what brought pleasure, what brought comfort. Silas approached each new experience with a mixture of wonder and reverence that made Elena feel treasured in a way she never had before. One evening in late January, Eleanor was closing up the bookstore alone. Martha had left early with a cold, and the winter storm that had been threatening all day had finally arrived, bringing heavy snow and strong winds. As she was shelving the last few returned books, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The bookstore was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the emergency exit sign by the back door. Elena fumbled for her phone to use as a flashlight, but the battery was dead. She'd forgotten to charge it that morning. She made her way carefully to the front desk, where she knew Martha kept candles for just such an emergency. She had just lit a few, placing them around the store to create pools of warm light, when she heard a key in the lock of the front door. Silas stepped in, shaking snow from his coat. "Elena, are you okay? The power's out all over this part of town." "I'm fine," she assured him, relief washing over her at the sight of him. Just getting ready to close up and head home." Silas stomped the snow from his boots and came to her, brushing a kiss across her lips. "I was worried when I couldn't reach you by phone." "Battery's dead," she explained. "But I'm glad you're here. How did you know where to find me?" "It's Saturday," he said simply. "Where else would you be at 6 o'clock?" The fact that he knew her schedule so well, that he'd come looking for her in a snowstorm, filled Eleanor with warmth. "We should get going before the roads get worse," she said, reaching for her coat. But when they looked outside, the snow was coming down so heavily that they could barely see across the street. "Maybe we should wait it out," Silas suggested. "The weather report said it should let up in an hour or so." Eleanor nodded, hanging her coat back up. "We've got candles and books. Could be worse places to be stranded." They settled onto the small couch in the reading nook, Silas's arm around Elena as she leaned against his chest. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, in the warm glow of the candles, they were cocooned in a world of their own. "Read to me," Silas requested, handing her a book from the shelf beside them. Elena opened it to a random page and began to read, her voice soft in the quiet store. It was a love poem, one she knew well, about two people finding each other against all odds. As she read the last lines, she felt Silas's arms tighten around her. She closed the book and turned to look at him. The candlelight cast golden highlights in his dark hair and made his eyes gleam. He was looking at her with such intensity, such open adoration that it took her breath away. "What?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice low, "about how different my life would be if you hadn't walked into the wrong bathroom that night." Elena smiled, reaching up to touch his face. Maybe it wasn't the wrong bathroom after all. Maybe it was exactly where I was supposed to be. Silas turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I've never believed in fate," he said. "I've always thought life was what you made it, nothing more, but meeting you—" He shook his head slightly. "It makes me wonder. About fate. About everything," he said. "About all the choices and chances that led us to that moment. About what it means to find someone who makes you feel like you've come home after being lost your whole life." The words washed over Elena, like a warm wave, settling deep in her heart. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and depth of feeling. "Silas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you." His eyes searched hers in the flickering light. "Neither have I," he said. "You know that better than anyone." The reminder of his inexperience, of the trust he'd placed in her by sharing that part of himself, made Elena's heart swell with tenderness. "You waited to fall in love," she said softly. "You waited for me." "I did," he acknowledged, "though I didn't know it was you I was waiting for until I found you." Elena took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Let me fall with you," she whispered. Thunder rumbled outside, a rare accompaniment to the snow, as if the sky itself was responding to the electricity between them. Silas hesitated, his eyes never leaving hers. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Eleanor said. He kissed her then, a kiss unlike any they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, yet still achingly tender. His hands trembled slightly as they framed her face, betraying his nervousness despite his certainty. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Elena Miles," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "With everything I am, everything I have, everything I hope to be. And I love you, Silas Thorne," she replied. "Not for what you can give me or who you might become, but for exactly who you are right now." In the gentle glow of the candles, with the storm raging outside and peace settling within, they kissed again. And in that kiss was a promise, not of perfection, but of presence. Not of a life without challenges, but of facing those challenges together. Elena had once thought love was supposed to be like fireworks, bright, explosive, attention-grabbing. But as Silas held her close in the quiet bookstore, she understood that real love was more like the candles around them, steady, warm, illuminating the darkness not with a momentary flash, but with constant, unwavering light. She had gone into that men's bathroom months ago looking for a place to break, to fall apart without an audience. Instead, she had found Silas, a man who had never been touched, but somehow knew exactly how to hold someone else's pain. A man who had been waiting his whole life for someone who would see him, truly see him, beneath the success and the reserve and the careful walls he had built. As the candlelight flickered around them and the snow continued to fall outside, Eleanor and Silas began a new chapter of their story. One written not in tears or fears or doubts, but in the quiet certainty of two hearts that had found, against all odds, exactly where they belonged. Together.